on the phone, I'd like to welcome to the program Luke Herrine. He's a third-year student at NYU School of Law and a member of Strike Debt, also a Lederman Law and Economics Fellow. Welcome to the program, Luke.
Thanks, Sam. Happy to be here.
And I have to say, for the sake of my father, who I think always harbored a secret dream that I would have gone to NYU Law following him, my father, I'm sure, is excited to hear from you.
I'm glad to make your father proud.
Yes. Well, there you go. I'm delivering some measure of pride here. Now, all right. So first off, tell us what, for those people who don't know, tell us what strike debt is, what the rolling Jubilee is. I think most people who listen to this program know that this was a basically came out of committee work, Occupy Wall Street. We're now on the third anniversary of Occupy Wall Street. But specifically, what is strike debt and the rolling Jubilee project?
So strike debt, as you say, grew out of the Occupy movement, specifically the occupation in New York. As the occupation started to wind down, or maybe you might say as it was shut down, a number of activists got together and held assemblies in Washington Square Park and realized that debt was the tie that binds not only them, but a whole lot of America nowadays and the world. They formed the Occupy Student Debt Campaign because that was the sort of debt that most of them were struggling with the most. And then that eventually became strike debt. And once strike debt was formed, one of the first ideas that came out of the group was to initiate what we call now the rolling Jubilee, which is to raise money and then to buy debt on the secondary market. And the secondary market, you can buy debt for literally pennies on the dollar, 3, 4, 5 cents on the dollar. And then whereas most people who enter this market buy this debt so that they can collect as much as they possibly can on it, the idea is that the rolling Jubilee buys that debt and then abolishes it, completely forgives the obligation to repay.
So for people who don't, weren't aware that there's this sort of like secondary debt market. I mean, just walk us through that a little bit, because I don't think people realize you owe money to a hospital, say, and it's quite clear after a certain period of time that you can't pay. They basically auction off this obligation or note that they have from you. Different debt companies will come by and just say, like, all right, this guy owes, $100,000 because of a medical emergency. We'll buy it for X and we can hopefully collect Y. Is that basically how it works?
That is basically it. So for instance, this latest debt that we bought is from Everest College, which is a subset of this massive for-profit college network called Corinthian Colleges. And this was basically, unmet tuition bills that Corinthian immediately sold to debt buyers for about 3 cents on the dollar. So we paid a little less than 3 cents on the dollar for it. And so whereas normally a debt collector would buy that from Corinthian for 3 cents on the dollar, and then, anything more than 3 cents on the dollar is pure profit for them. So they just try to collect as much as possible. They'll tell the debtor, you owe the full amount, and they'll try to collect the full amount. But if the debtor negotiates down, they're happy to make anything more than 3 cents on the dollar.
And, just so people know, can I go out and if I owe this money, can I go out onto this market and buy my own debt?
If only that were the case. That's what corporations can do, but not individuals. This debt is sold in massive bundles. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of debt of debts, debts from individual debtors are sold at the same time in sort of this anonymous package. And then what happens is the debt buyer or the source of the debt will, what they sell you is basically some names and addresses, sometimes some more information. And that's only then do you find out whose debt you have. And then if you're a debt collector, you find out their address and phone number and start hounding them nonstop.
And so wait, so when you guys went in, you raised what was it? How many millions, or how much money did you raise, and how much money did you discharge? How much debt did you essentially vaporize?
So we have raised in total. We stopped taking donations at the end of last year, but up to that point, we raised about $700,000. Almost entirely from small donations. I mean, and we have the transparency up on our website. And so far we have abolished about $15 million of medical debt, and then with this debt by an additional $3.8 million of student debt. So that puts the grand total around $19 million. For this latest round of debt, we spent about $100,000. We spent $100,000 for $3.8 million of debt. That's about 2.7 cents on the dollar.
Wow. And so when you did this last round, you had the $100,000. You go into, I guess, it's specifically a student debt market. You didn't know. Did you know whose debt? You didn't know. I mean, it seems to me you didn't know whose debt you were buying, but did you know from whom the debt was incurred? In other words, did you know you were buying stuff from Everest College, or was how much do you know about what you're buying in that debt, I guess?
Right. So it actually varies greatly with the type of debt, with the amount of money that you're willing to spend, the amount of debt that you're getting. But in this case, we ended up, the first institution we wanted to buy debt from was Sallie Mae, and I think maybe many of your listeners will be familiar with who Sallie Mae is. They do a lot of, and they've now spun off Navient, who does their basically public student loan debt collecting, but also private student loan debt collecting. And in fact, when we reached out to Sallie Mae, we actually ended up talking with somebody who was getting ready to, was interested in selling this debt. I think a lot of people don't know that Sallie Mae sells debt on the secondary market. And then as soon as they found out that we weren't going to collect it, they clammed right up and were not interested. But it was an experience worth having, just to hear Sallie Mae admit that it sells debt on the secondary market for again, pennies on the dollar.
It's also interesting because clearly they don't want it widely known that this debt is available so cheaply, right? I mean, but why is that? I mean, why do you think that is the case?
Well, so it's important to distinguish here between what might be called public student loans, that is student loans issued by the government, and private student loans. And that's student loans issued by, a bank or the college itself, in this case by Corinthian College itself or Everest College itself. But so public student loans aren't generally sold on the secondary market as much because the federal government has extraordinary powers to be able to collect that debt, and also previous to when Obama declared that there weren't going to be any privately issued public student loans. It used to be a much more confusing system. Now the government just issues the loans directly. The government guaranteed those loans. So there's very little reason for the government, or for a collector for the government, say Sallie Mae, to sell public student loans in the secondary market, because they have all of these extraordinary powers to collect as much as possible as they can on it. That doesn't mean that they're never sold in the secondary market. Sometimes if a debt is really hard to collect, and it just doesn't seem like the person is going to respond even to lawsuits and court proceedings, then it might be worth selling. But private student loans are different. They're much more like other consumer loans, like, say, credit card debt, or auto loans.
And those private student loans, can they be discharged in a bankruptcy as opposed to government-sponsored student loans, or is it all student loans you can't escape in a bankruptcy?
That is a good question. I believe, unfortunately, I don't think I want to answer that question. I thought I would have said that there's a difference, but I don't want to say that without double checking.
Well, then I want to note that for my father, that even though I'm not at NYU Law, I wouldn't have necessarily known that had I completed law school. So
that's right. Well, I'm in bankruptcy class this semester, so maybe I'll know by the end of this.
All right. Well, my father also bankruptcy attorney. So.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. So anticipate an invitation to dinner at my father's house. I probably won't be there, but So with that question, it's rare that the government will put it on there because they have sort of extraordinary means in which to collect this debt. When they, I mean, one of the stories I saw earlier this week was that there was a significant amount of student debt that was actually being, they were garnishing the Social Security benefits of both people who are eligible for retirement benefits and disability benefits, which is particularly egregious because if you're getting disability payments, it's because you can't work, and obviously can't pay it. So is that the kind of debt that they sell? Go ahead.
I should point out that for most sorts of debt, they're not allowed to collect on public benefits, on Social Security or unemployment. That's uncollectible for most sorts of debts, but the government can do what's called an administrative offset. So if you owe, they can take it out of tax liability, they can take it out of Social Security benefits, they can take it out of a whole number of different. If the government, provides you with money, they can take student loans out of that if they want to.
Well, of course, because why would you want to incentivize getting a more educated population?
Well, that's exactly what we're trying to highlight with this buy and with the formation of the debt collective, which is that the Department of Education is not oriented towards helping people get education in large part. In this case, the Department of Education is basically a debt collector for for-profit colleges and for other colleges. So, the Department of Education here has substantial powers to forgive the debts of, let's just talk about the Corinthian students for a second. There's a number of ways that they could make things easier for these students and, in fact, completely forgive their obligation to pay that are written into student loan law. But the Department of Education is currently trying to basically sell as many Corinthian campuses to keep them open under another owner. I would ask whether that's because they stand to collect billions of dollars from these students.
Interesting. And so, I mean, getting back to, I may have interrupted you, but so when you when Rolling Jubilee purchases $100,000 for this to buy up this debt, do you know that it comes from Corinthian College or Everest College, or do you? I mean, I assume you don't know. Hey, it's Jim Peterson and Betty Thompson and so and so who owe this debt. But do you know who it was owed to?
Right. So when we're buying it, we did know that it was from Everest College, which I should be clear. Corinthian Colleges has a series of brands, and Everest is one of its brands. Corinthian is the biggest for-profit college company in the country, although it is currently on the verge of collapse, in part because of a massive number of lawsuits against it, including one by the CFPB filed yesterday. But we knew that Corinthian was perhaps the most egregious actor in this market. But we didn't know, as you say, the individual debtors until we bought the debt and got the information on these debtors.
So lastly, all right. So what happens? I went to Everest College, let's say, and with what happens with a lot of these for-profit colleges, I'm one of the people who dropped out. I still owe them whatever it is, $65,000 in debt, or $20,000 in debt, $15,000 in debt. Did I just get a letter this week that just said, hey, guess what? You don't owe any more money. It's gone.
That's right. So we sent out letters to all the students whose debt we forgave. Usually it's a matter of hundreds of dollars for most of these students, although that's a big deal for a lot of these students because the attendees of for-profit colleges tend to be low income to very low income. So yes, but we sent them a letter and they found out that a lot of them, of course, didn't believe it. But once they called us or emailed us, we gave them our contact information, and we told them what happened. A number of them have already spoken to the press about it, and even more students who have heard about this, who we've been in contact with, whose debt we weren't able to buy at Corinthian, are now banding together and organizing to resist the debt that has been imposed upon them by this predatory institution and by the Department of Education as a debt collector. So we don't see this as the end. By no means. $3.8 million is a drop in the bucket compared to $1.2 trillion of student debt. What we see as the inevitable next step is for student debtors, not only of for-profit colleges, but in general, to band together and to demand that that public education is a public good, is
Right.
free and accessible to all people who want it.
Great. That's great. And I can imagine, if I had gotten that letter, my first reaction would be, this is some type of advance fee scam. This is coming from a prince, somewhere whose cousin left money in a bank or whatever it is. And so, have you had any personal conversations? Were you on one of the receiving ends of one of these emails? Because I imagine these folks are it's got to be a huge, just emotional relief to them.
Yeah, I personally haven't talked with any of the individual debtors, although some of them have other legal questions that we have put together a legal team to try to help people connect with. But I haven't, unfortunately, been able to talk with any of the individual debtors, although if your listeners are interested in hearing some of their stories, a couple of the news sources that have covered the debt buy already have put some of their stories in, have direct quotes, including NBC News and CNN Money.
And I imagine you'll have some of those at the websites. I got strikedebt.org, rollingjubilee.org, and debtcollective.org. We will put links to those at majority.fm. Luke Herrine, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate your coming on and appreciate the work you've been doing.
Thank you, Sam, and thanks for covering this story.